2011 has been a year of propositions, predictions and potential collapses. But in 2012, will the impending regulations start to bring order to what, at least according to the tabloids and the broadsheets, has been volatile chaos in the markets, or will the alphabet soup create more problems than it solves? One man with his finger firmly on the regulatory pulse is Adam Bennett, Managing Director at leading financial technology consultants Hatstand, who joins me now. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning.
So perhaps if you could just tell us a little bit more about Hatstand and what your company brings to the table.
Yeah, sure. Hatstand is a niche consultancy specialising in front office trading systems, specifically from an IT perspective. We've been in business for 13 and a half years. We have offices in London, New York and Hong Kong. We've been providing sort of development, implementation, project management, business analysis and technical analysis services, including testing, predominantly, as I say, in that sort of front office trading systems. We've built over 50 market adapters. We've worked with a number of organisations on their original MiFID, Basel II, and the Dodd-Frank initiative, which we're working on with several clients at the moment. So this is an area which we're very strong on. We've also got a very innovative sort of graduate development, talent development program where we take graduates who've got 3 to 5 years experience, probably non-domain experience. However, we cross-train them into the financial markets and we give them an opportunity to build a career in the city. And it's been extremely successful. In fact, we've employed over 80 graduates in the last 18 months. So I think that's a pretty strong message and very popular with the government at the moment, although we haven't told them. But there we go. I'm
sure at this particular time, anything that says university, no, it really is good, probably goes down quite well.
It does, yeah. I mean, it's slightly different because we're taking people who've already got the 3 to 5 years, even up to 8 years experience in other industries, and then what we're doing is we're giving them specific training in certain financial markets and instruments and product areas, and allowing them then to take up roles and positions in our investment banks and our clients for up between 18 months and 2 years. And then this gives them an opportunity really then to build a career, either to continue as a consultant with Hatstand or to be converted to a permanent member of staff at the client site. So it's quite an innovative solution, and it's been very successful for us. And that represents nearly 50% of our business, with the consultancy being the other 50%.
So if we can just look at the consultancy side as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, regulation's huge issue, particularly MiFID II at the moment, with the proposals out at the end of last year. And it seems like the blueprint taken from the equity side from MiFID I is perhaps being applied almost broad brush across a lot of other instrument classes. And that's going to be having huge changes. But is it going to be positive or negative?
That's a very good question. I think your idea of or your comment about broad brush is quite a poignant one, because a lot of the rules associated with running or the rules in MiFID I about pre-trade transparency, post-trade transparency, so they're very difficult to basically just migrate those same rules onto certainly some of the small, shall we say, OTC derivatives, which they're very bespoke, they're very unique, and it's very difficult to have a pre-trade transparency arrangement on something that essentially only trades perhaps once a month. So that I think that some of the rules have yet to be sort of defined further, and indeed I don't think we're going to see the level 2 definition probably till towards the end of this year. So I think the MiFID II stuff is probably going to be a lot longer than originally anticipated before we actually start getting some firm action on that. But organisations need to be planning now, because there's such a lot of change coming down the pipeline. Certainly the high-frequency trading rules, regulations that we've seen coming out of the European Commission, that they are starting to have an impact. They will impact in 2012. Dodd-Frank, a significant amount of Dodd-Frank is impacting in 2012. Banking reform, we're already starting to see some of that. The government are already starting to make a certain amount of commitments about what they're going to be achieving and the timescales for that. And then we've also got Basel III, and what's going to be obviously a significant amount of change in terms of the way in which organisations are going to have to keep their funds and keep their reserves and manage the sort of risk data and management data. This whole region is the biggest impact is going to be to really is going to become to in the sort of data management arena. Huge amounts more data are going to be required across the whole organisation, and I think we're going to see quite a lot of change in the way. I think funnily enough, I think there's one mistake that people are making. They're thinking if they're going to be compliant with Dodd-Frank, then that will make them compliant with MiFID II, and I think that's a mistake, because although there is a significant amount of cross-correlation between Dodd-Frank and MiFID II, there is also a significant chunk which doesn't cross-correlate. And we've written a number of white papers on this, and in actual fact, people can download this from our website, and that would be quite useful for people to get a view of the stuff that doesn't cross-correlate and the stuff that they're going to have to do in terms of MiFID II. But it is going to impact a significant amount. Equities is pretty minimal, because that obviously went through the original MiFID I, but we're going to see a significant amount of change, especially in the OTC area. We're going to see a lot of sort of interest rate swap and other derivatives come onto sort of exchange type or venue, trading venues as they like to call them, organised trading venues. So we're going to see quite a lot of change there, and I think there's a lot yet to be defined, a lot more work to be done by the European Commission until we get a clearer view. But in terms of preparation and data management, that needs to be done now.
So what part of the regulations do you think will have the biggest IT impact?
I think the largest impact is going to be in the sort of data management arena. The amount of data that's going to be stored is absolutely immense. I mean, it's still being estimated, but essentially, just in terms of tick databases and in terms of all the trade databases, organisations are going to have to be able to recreate every single trade that they do, and then they're going to have to be able to not only recreate the trade, but all the market conditions, or all other similar trades that are taking place at that time, the policies and the guidelines that they had with their clients, and the best execution policy they had with their client at the time, to be able to prove best execution. And they have to be able to do this for up to 10 years. So you can imagine the amount of data is going to be absolutely enormous. As well as that, you're going to have to start storing pre-trade transparency, post-trade transparency, trade reporting across all financial instruments, whereas at the moment, obviously, a significant amount of those, there's a fairly minimal amount of data management involved. So it's a huge change in the data management. There's a whole new set of fields that are going to have to be created. And obviously, this information, more importantly, it's not only going to be stored, but it's going to have to be managed in a way that the data can be retrieved and reported against and provided to the regulatory organisations such as the FSA in the future.
Well, doesn't this sort of touch on the consolidated tape for Europe that people were talking about, the idea that in theory everybody wants to be singing from the same hymn sheet, and it sounds to me like that would also make life easier, and what they're asking everyone to do is just store all the same data in every single company, because surely the market conditions, whilst you might have a different perspective, the data itself should in theory a lot of it should be the same.
And there are a number of vendors out there now that are trying to provide a sort of a consolidated tape view of the world, because that only works if you're actually trading with that venue. And there will be occasions where some participants may deliberately trade with some fairly small venues in different parts of Europe, specifically to try and hide their trades and therefore not impact the market price. And also if they see a significant arbitrage opportunity between different venues. So I think the consolidated tape is going to have to be something that will be centrally managed at some point in the future, but as yet I don't think we're seeing the final product.
Yeah, because there were concerns when the proposals came out from MiFID, and everyone was saying, well, we were expecting a sort of centrally controlled thing, and now you're saying you want it privatised. If anything, it's going to make it worse, more fragmented, and even harder to bring all the data together.
Yeah, and I think, again, with some of the proposals in MiFID II, we're seeing even more reliance on the different regulatory authorities across different parts of Europe having to communicate with each other and pass information between each other. And I don't think they've got that particularly working well yet. So how are we going to get all the exchange, all the different venues, and we're obviously going to start seeing some of the dark pools convert potentially into organised trading facilities, or potentially into systematic internalizers, or maybe even a hybrid of the two. And if we're going to see a lot of changes in that, and all that data is going to have to be stored and managed, and we're going to be yet to see how that information is going to flow into a centralised facility. But I don't think that's going to be, day one of MiFID II. I think it's going to be quite some time down the road.
Especially as not only have you got to store that data, but in such a way where there's, because presumably this is to prove best execution and the like in a lot of cases, is to be able to say, well, look, this is the conditions at the time, this is how we did the trade, and this is why we did what we did. You have to find a way not only to store it, but to store it in a way where the outside world can view it as an accurate picture, so that you're not changing the data, you're not affecting anything post-trade in order to make your position look better than perhaps it necessarily was at the time.
Yeah, although this all gets a little bit more confusing, because if you've actually signed an agreement with your client, so if a broker's signed an agreement with their client where they're given certain permissions to the broker to trade in certain ways, which they typically would, and trade only on certain venues, and even if there is a better price somewhere else, if you've signed away that right, then you could argue that in actual fact the real test of best execution is the client agreement that you signed, which states what the policy is for best execution between the client and that specific broker. So that's why that information needs to be stored and managed. And I think we may even find that some organisations have got situations where they've got multiple versions of best execution policies managed across multiple clients and so forth. But this, it all becomes a little bit more complex and semantics. But each individual broker will have to manage their own data and be able to recreate that trade and the market at that time of that specific trade, as well as the policies that they had with that specific client, and then effectively be able to report not only to the client but potentially to the FSA or the Bank of England or whoever it is going to be. Yeah, absolutely.
So, talking of the Bank of England and the UK in general, the Tobin Tax, as it has been known, not exactly had the rousing applause that I think they were expecting when they announced it. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I can think of any credible reason why it should happen, and I'd be intrigued to know if you can think of one.
Why it should happen? I could see that potentially it may be attractive to certain governments in order to increase tax revenue. So that's potentially another tax revenue generation. And it may also be useful, depending on how it was implemented, if there are certain governments who want to make it more difficult for high-frequency trading to take place. And therefore, if you're making a tax on every single trade and you're doing thousands of trades a day, then, and there's a tax associated with each one, then that would make it less attractive. So I can see that obviously from some political elements in certain parts of Europe who are less positive about the financial markets industry perhaps than others, that they may see this as an attractive way to try and curtail the financial markets industry.
Seems a bit heavy-handed, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that the current UK government stance, which is, in principle, if it's implemented across all markets globally, then it's acceptable, and therefore it makes sense and it will generate income for obviously the governments and so forth. Then that would be sensible, but it would certainly make Europe uncompetitive if it was only done unilaterally, or essentially just in Europe. And the other thing that perhaps would be slightly negative about it from a UK perspective is that the majority of trades take place in London. So the financial markets, on some days in London can represent 80% of all trades in Europe, which is huge.
Yeah.
Take that 80%, apply the Tobin tax, and that Tobin tax goes into the Central European coffers, not into London's coffers. I doubt very much whether London would receive 80% of it back again. So you could argue that in actual fact it's a Central European tax which Britain perhaps wouldn't receive the best benefit from, and London would become less competitive. Let's call it that, less competitive.
Well, this is the problem. Well, I think where it falls down is what you're trying to do is you're assuming that your pie stays the same size and you just take a bigger slice. But what you're actually doing is taking a larger slice of what theoretically will become a much smaller pie very, very quickly, as people go, well, I'll just trade somewhere else where I don't have to pay.
Yeah, and the real interesting thing, because depending on how it was implemented, but we're already starting to see certain situations where some trading entities, actually physically based here in London, they're headquartered elsewhere globally, and therefore can sort of sit outside of some certain sort of MiFID rules and various other things, because effectively they aren't part of the European community. Now, it seems daft that you can have a situation where you can actually have people sat in London, trading in London, but essentially sitting outside the arrangements. I'm sure they would try and get around that, but there would be certain ways in which I'm sure that could be achieved. Or everyone just moves to Switzerland, because obviously they're outside of the European community.
Nice place to be.
A little bit expensive.
Yeah, but going back to what we were saying before with the FSA and the Bank of England, is it just a rebadging? Are we going to see any real changes out of this, or is it just going to be, well, we're no longer the FSA now, so anything they did before, it's fine, we're just the Bank of England?
I think we will see some changes, but I think it'll take quite a while to implement, and I think that it will be towards the end of this year that we start seeing that transition process. But I think the transition, and this is my view, will be initially. There's the new agencies that are being created, the new structure that's being created, and that will be more formalised. And we've got the FPA and the FCA and various other elements and so forth. But I think we will see, obviously the existing roles and responsibilities will migrate to the new structure, but essentially we won't see a significant amount of change probably till towards the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next. Obviously, Basel III is going to have an impact, and we're going to see a certain amount of change. There's a whole new level of change in terms of capital adequacy. There's a whole new set of data requirements and measurements that are going to have to be changed. And there's a significant movement away from traditional government AAA-rated bonds to equities. Funnily enough, by 2018, we're going to see a significant amount more equity held by banks as their AAA Tier 1 capital, rather than currently you see a lot of AAA-rated government-type bonds. You could argue, well, what's going to happen to all the government bonds? Well, first of all, will there be any AAA-rated government bonds in the future? But perhaps that's being a little bit too cynical. But secondly, we're also seeing a lot of new trading venues being created in terms of organised trading facilities and swap execution facilities in the States and various others. What we're going to see is that they're going to have central counterparties, and those counterparties and facilities will require obviously AAA rated stock to be held as part of that process going forward. So we're going to see a lot of change in that area. But again, more data management.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us, but unfortunately we are almost out of time.
Sure.
But if I could just ask you one quick question about your upcoming panel session at Trade Tech this year. Mm-hmm. You're going to be exploring the impact of mandatory regulatory change, specifically on the areas of data management and trading venue connectivity.
Yeah.
What are your opinions right now?
Yes, there's a whole new level of requirements that are going to have to be implemented. Lots of new venues. We're going to have a significant amount of OTCs that have never traded electronically before that are now going to be trading electronically in the future. Big push to migrate as much as possible onto electronic trading, so lots of new venues. We're going to see obviously a lot of change potentially in the existing dark pool market, so there's going to be quite a lot of new venues and changes to existing venues that's going to require a lot of mandatory change. We've also got Basel III, we've got Dodd-Frank, and we've got MiFID II. These are creating, over the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of change that is non-negotiable. So the investment banks and the brokers are going to have to effectively adapt, change their environments and integrate new solutions. And we're here to help that. And we've got a number of white papers on the sort of things that they should be expecting and changing. And in addition to that, you mentioned data management. We've talked about data management a lot in this session. And I think organisations now need to be preparing for the changes. We can, rather than lifting the bonnet 3 times to change across the 3 initiatives, there's an opportunity to lift it once significantly and then perhaps only half lift it 2 or 3 times afterwards, rather than going through the whole process So yes, I'm really looking forward to speaking at the conference this year. I think it's a very interesting subject, and hopefully we'll get a lot of people attending and a lot of feedback.
I hope so. I'll be looking forward to watching it. And in the meantime, if people do want to download those white papers, where can they go?
Well, our Hatstand website, obviously, so it's www.hatstandconsulting.com.
Brilliant. And if you'd like to find other white papers and, of course, more interviews like this one, you can visit www.tradetecheurope.com.